for my money, the single most interesting work of modernist literature in terms of intellectual rigor, the existential profundity, and the sheer amount of fun involved in the text has got to be The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. This book is a hoot. It is a short novella. It is a fairly quick read, and as weird as it is, it is just it's just a rocket ride of pleasure, quite frankly. And when you read it, if you're going to remember anything from your undergraduate experience, let's say, you want to remember this one, because suddenly you get a lot more jokes. The problem of Gregor Samsa, spoiler alert, he's a bug, comes up again and again and again in popular culture. It is just a common touchstone, and you will be surprised at how many times it gets name checked here and there in everyday life. So now you are in on the joke. And what is education for other than to get more jokes? It just makes it more fun. The story itself is, of course, somewhat absurd, but it is the telling of it that really makes the experience come alive for the readers, because all these little grace notes get dropped along the way. And just when you think it's such a serious and searing experience of the harrowing early 20th century, this is published in 1915 after all in Eastern Europe, and Franz was German speaking and all of that. Okay, German-speaking Jew in Eastern Europe, things are dicey. But the book unveils great beauty, great humor, and just a lot of fun. Amid all of that agony, amid all of that angst, amid all of that torturous scream iconography, you have an awful lot of fun reading this text. Even if it's a little bit depressing from time to time, if you just invest a little bit more time in thinking about it, it becomes a little bit easier to handle, a little bit less depressing, quite frankly. And it all, of course, begins with perhaps the most iconic opening line in all of literature. It beats anything that the great 19th century artists came out with, and in just the sheer profundity or confounding nature of it, and the sense of whimsy, quite frankly, that is packed into it. And Kafka is notoriously difficult to translate from his German. So you're going to find a lot of different variations on this, but for our purposes here, we can go with: when Gregor Samsa woke one morning from troubling dreams, he found himself transformed right there in his bed into some sort of monstrous insect. Now, of course, different translations are going to do what different translations do. Insect can get twisted around an awful lot. You see bug, you see vermin, you see cockroach, you see all of these disgusting little creatures. In the original German, it's even more vague than that. It's just a kind of monstrous, unclean animal that is a little bit of a mystery. And that's kind of the point, because if you make something too concrete, if you label something too specifically, too scientifically, it becomes less interesting for the readers, because then they have less imagination tingled. And this is part of that purpose. But this is also important. He wakes up and he finds himself an insect. The title is The Metamorphosis, so immediately you think, okay, he woke up and kind of like Tom Hanks in Big, he just discovers, oh my God, I'm an insect. I'm a bug. I'm a cockroach. I'm a dung beetle is one of the other ones that tends to get thrown in there. But the surprise of that moment, the curiosity of it, like, huh? What? That is inviting. That is curious. And that teases you to keep reading because, a first sentence is a first sentence and it's got to hook you. And this one has the greatest hook in modernist literature and potentially much more than that, let's just say. Few things in this, of course. When Gregor Samsa woke one morning from troubling dreams immediately signals, okay, dream state. And we're thinking, all right, German-speaking Eastern Europe of the early 20th century, this is a culture that is on its intellectual height, somewhat steeped in the works and thought of Sigmund Freud. Troubling dreams. We are in a kind of a dream state throughout this story. And we can always say, well, is this all just a dream? Is this all just a figment of his imagination? Well, the answer generally is no. We are told again and again and again and again and again that he is a bug. He is an insect. This is not a dream. This is all real. But there is this kind of haze around it that Kafka plays with, matching very hard, real materialist facts in it and simple, solid substances. Think about all the times that he talks about furniture and the physical reality of his room against this kind of surreal quality of, like he is a bug. And it is very important also. He awoke one morning from troubling dreams, and you can start to empathize with him and say, well, okay, he didn't sleep very well. He is getting up very early. He has a hard job that he hates. And who among us hasn't woken up in the wee small hours of too early in the morning to get up and go to a job that we don't want to do? And we just feel like an insect. We feel awful. And we can start down that road and say, well, okay, so he woke up one morning feeling like a bug. I've been there. But no, he is not feeling like a bug. He is a bug. It's not a simile. It is not a metaphor, perhaps even. He is a bug. The text insists on that. And the whole opening is just a hoot from there. Because we go, when Gregor Samsa woke one morning from troubling dreams, he found himself transformed right there in his bed into some sort of monstrous insect. He was lying on his back, which was hard like a carapace. And when he raised his head a little, he saw his curved brown belly segmented by rigid arches, atop which the blanket, already slipping, was just barely managing to cling. His many legs, pitifully thin compared to the rest of him, waved helplessly before his eyes. I love that. And there are repeated references to the physicality that he didn't really understand just yet, of having all of these legs, and the oddness of his body as he is inspecting it and trying to figure out, well, okay, this is different. How do I do this now? He has to relearn the physical limitations and physical capacities of this physical body. The text is very, very insistent upon his physicality. And that specificity also, his curved brown belly segmented by rigid arches. He has really studied an awful lot of bugs for this. Kafka did, I believe. And so there is a sense of anatomical accuracy in what he's talking about, which again plays against the excuse, the escape hatch of saying, well, it's all just a dream, it's a fantasy. No, there's something very, very real in this. And it is that conflict between fantasy and reality, between dreamfulness and wakefulness, that we are always suspended between, trying to figure out where we are. And that makes it all the more fun. Now, from there, you get the long story of his first concern being, I'm going to be late for work. He is very concerned in that opening thing, not with the fact that he is a bug, as much as he's concerned about being a bug, but not as much as, oh my God, I have to get to work. My train is running. I'm late. I know the schedule. I'm trying to figure out which train can I get. Can I get just more 5 minutes of sleep? And again, as readers, we are drawn into this and starting to think, well, yeah, okay, who hasn't had that little negotiation when they're lying in bed? All right, just 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. But no, we are not a bug in that situation. Gregor is. And that itself is sort of funny. And then you get the family coming on, and we get introduced to them through the door of his bedroom in this apartment. And this is all very significant because so much of the drama of this, especially in this opening scene, pretty much the entire drama, takes place inside this room. It's it's basically an overcrowded with furniture bedroom. You get the sense that in a very Kafka-esque fashion, the furniture is all rather momentous and oppressing and dark and imposing, and all of this deep, heavy stuff crowding in on him. But just physically, he cannot move around in it now that he has this new giant bug body. And that is funny in itself. And then, of course, his boss shows up and starts knocking on the door, which again is hysterical, because whose boss really shows up? Excuse me, you're late for work. Your mom says you're still sleeping. That doesn't happen, but in this case it does. And it is one more sense of the horror that is Gregor's job. But the story goes from there once they discover, oh my God, he's a bug. And you get this reaction to the family. So from there, it really just becomes a kind of a character study of these people, of Gregor himself and his parents and his sister. And they all react a little differently to it. The father is probably the most resistant to it. The mother is a little queasy and she isn't sure. The sister, Greta, at first is really quite sympathetic. She takes care of him. She brings him a bowl of, she brings him his favorite breakfast very early on, which is a bowl of milk with some crumbled up bread in it, essentially a bowl of Cheerios, and puts it on the bowl, and he goes and he takes a big, he dunks his face in it, which is kind of what I do on mornings when I'm not feeling myself. But he discovers that he doesn't like it, and then so she has to figure out, well, what does he like? And she starts to recognize, well, he's not eating it. What can I try? And she starts bringing him the rancid food from the back of the fridge or whatever, the stuff that's gone a little stale or a little funky. And that suddenly, as a cockroach, he loves. And oh my God, this is just delicious. And it's kind of funny. But the drama plays out along that lines, and we start to learn the backstory of this family about how the father lost his job, and Gregor had to go to work to provide for the family, and the father has since become kind of a layabout. He feels inadequate. He feels kind of pathetic. And that's a really important point. As they're going through their daily lives, we start to realize that, well, they never really leave the apartment. They're always there. And Gregor is just suddenly different. And they're trying to keep him in his room. He's kind of staying in his room and hiding from them whenever he can. But they're just ignoring it. They're repressing their own anxiety to it. They're pretending it isn't there. And there are all of these familiar reactions to psychological peculiarity, let's say, that we in our day and age have easy labels for, but that Freud had really just introduced the science of, and nobody had really come up with names and labels. So they were swimming in a very wild pool right there, whereas we understand everything so clearly and empirically. But that relationship of Gregor to his family slowly becomes the main drama of this story, with the father growing more and more hostile to Gregor, who is now, of course, the breadwinner, who is no longer winning the bread. He can't go to work, so the tension is building, and the father is resisting that. And you get this one passage where a fight breaks out towards the end of a particularly tense period, and the father starts throwing apples at Gregor. One lightly lobbed apple grazed Gregor's back and slid off harmlessly, but it was immediately followed by another that embedded itself in his back. Gregor tried to drag himself forward, as if this sudden shocking pain might vanish with a change of place. But he felt nailed to the spot and collapsed there, his legs splayed out, all his senses in a state of utter bewilderment. He caught only a last glimpse of the door to his room flying open, his shrieking sister, and his mother running out of the room before her, wearing only a chemise, for his sister had undressed the unconscious woman to let her breathe more freely. Then he saw his mother rush to his father's side, her unfastened skirts slipping one by one from about her waist as she ran, saw her stumble across these skirts as she threw herself at his father and, embracing him, in perfect union with him, but now Gregor's vision began to fail him, she clasped her hands at the back of his father's head and pleaded with him to spare Gregor's life. So much information there. So much information there. Perhaps a little too much. Now, the hostility that starts off gentle with the apples soon becomes a little bit more cruel, a little bit more insistent, a little bit more violent, of the father against the son, Gregor. And that's disturbing. But perhaps even more so is the way the mother is described here. The nakedness of the mother is a recurring theme. She is, throughout this story, always A, lying down, and B, scantily clad, let's say. Here she is wearing only a chemise in this translation, essentially a nightgown or even lingerie, for his sister had undressed the unconscious woman to let her breathe more freely. Breathing freely is a recurring thing in this story as well. And she is unconscious, and there is something oddly sexualized about her, and the fact that she is always unconscious and lying down and almost always undressed. And here you get her in the act as the father, who is, well, you got to figure Gregor is in his mid-20s or so, I think. The father is probably in his mid to late 40s, not an old man, although throughout the beginning of this story, he does always seem just like an old, impotent man, doddering around the apartment. But suddenly, this act of violence brings out something new in him and inspires the mother to this action. She runs to his side, her unfastened skirts slipping one by one about her waist as she ran, saw her stumble across these skirts as she threw herself at her father and embracing him in perfect union with him. She is getting naked as she runs across the living room, and suddenly they are embracing while she is bare naked, essentially. That's something. But now Gregor's vision began to fail him. I'm sure he was grateful for that. I mean, nobody really wants to see their parents in that moment. And she is somewhat eroticized in this moment. And there is, because of the violence of it, a weird mixture of this. And again, we are dinging off all of these Freudian bells of Eros and Thanatos and violence and control and quite frankly the Oedipus complex. Here you have the father portrayed as a mortal enemy of the son, and the mother portrayed as a sexual object. That's Oedipus all over. So Kafka had been reading his Freud at this moment, and the weirdness of it is palpable and recurrent throughout the story. So we get more of this as the play or as the story builds. After the lodgers come, they decide that they can make money by opening up their apartment, which is apparently huge. Lots written about this apartment, lots of doors and windows and all, or lots of doors and walls and all of that. But they open up the apartment to lodgers, people who are going to rent rooms out, and they're going to get an income that way. And they rent it out to these young men who immediately start to perv, I guess is the word, on the sister, Greta. And the parents are honestly kind of encouraging that and saying, well, yes, we can entertain these young men. And what are they? Well, they like pretty young girls. And hey, we have one here. And it's a little too accommodating for that. But, you know, that's a personal taste there, let's say, or a personal reading interpretation. But at one point it becomes a little bit more acute. They ask the girl, they learn that, well, you play the piano or you play the violin. I hear, yes, I hear, I'm sure you're wonderful. Why don't you go get your violin? Come on down here and entertain us. A little pervy right there. You know, you are here to entertain us. Okay, fine. She does. She goes. She gets her music stand. She gets her violin, and she starts, you know, getting in place. And she realizes that they're all kind of crowding in around her as she's trying to get herself in position. And then she starts to play. And after a few minutes of her playing, they become less interested, let's say, and just sort of wander off. It's like, oh, wow, you are good. But through this, you also have Gregor, who has been hidden away the entire time that the lodgers have moved in, and he is hearing his little sister play this music, and he loves his little sister, and he loves music, and he feels uncontrollably drawn to that. So much so that he comes out of his room, sneaking out while everybody else is sort of distracted in the living room. He comes out. And that moment is really extraordinarily evocative. And his sister's playing was so lovely. Her face was tilted to one side. Searchingly, sadly, her eyes followed the lines of notes. Gregor crept a bit farther forward and ducked his head down close to the floor so as perhaps to catch her eye. Was he a beast that music so moved him? He felt as if he were being shown the way to that unknown nourishment he craved. He was determined to creep all the way up to his sister, to pluck at her skirt, and in this way, indicate to her that she should come to his room with her violin, for no one here was rewarding her playing as he meant to reward her. And a little down, Gregor would raise himself to the height of her armpit and kiss her throat, which, now that she went to the office every day, she wore free of ribbon or collar. Wow. Again, a lot of information here. For one thing, just from Gregor's perspective, he is so moved by the music, and that is getting him in touch with a kind of idealism, a kind of aestheticism, a kind of humanity that has been denied him for quite some time at this point. The humanity that made him into a bug or the lack of humanity that made him into a bug in the first place, where he just felt like, all right, I'm just going to get up and go to work and do what I have to do, and I'll shut off all of my personal pleasures, and I'll just do my job. That is suddenly drifting away as he hears this music, and he feels enlivened to it. Was he a beast that music so moved him? This is the last moment, really, where he feels he is a little bit human within that. The metamorphosis has not really gone its full progress, and he can feel this one little moment that is calling to him. But this is also obviously very wrapped up with some weird sexuality again. The description of her as he is lovingly watching her, her face tilted to one side, searchingly, sadly, her eyes following the lines of notes. There is a kind of big brotherly paternalistic view of this. Perhaps he likes her being a little weak, a little tender, a little pliable. Maybe scholars will have their say on that. But beyond that, also, he felt as if he were being shown the way to that unknown nourishment he craved. He wants to consume the music or her. It's a little unclear. He was determined to creep, great word, all the way up to his sister, to pluck at her skirt, and in this way indicate to her that she should come to his room with her violin, for no one here was rewarding her playing as he meant to reward her. My God, come on, this is... And then the imagination goes further. Gregor would rise himself in the subjunctive mood. He is speculating. We are inside his head as his fantasy would raise himself to the height of her armpit and kiss her throat. That is not a brotherly place to kiss a girl. Kiss her throat. That's really intimate. Which, now that she went to the office every day, she wore free of ribbon or collar, more breathing space, like we saw with the mother, more clothes left open, like we saw with the mother. She is becoming more of a woman. In that little detail also, that she went to the office, she has gotten a job, she is growing up. All this is curious and disturbing. But it goes on. After that moment, after Gregor comes out and the lodgers see him, and understandably, I think, although they are kind of painted as jackasses, understandably are a little outraged, and they storm out and they say, "We're not paying, we're not staying another night, and we're not paying any for how long we've stayed or anything like that." And they just bolt. They're gone. And the parents are all flustered and verklempt, let's say. Greta takes this personally, too. This is a turning point for her. She has been the one going in and bringing him food, straightening up his room a little after, from time to time, although that's been waning for a while. At this point, however, she reaches a breaking point. Interestingly, it is when Gregor intercedes between her and young men and possible suitors or romantic interests, however appropriate or inappropriate or well-intentioned they may have been. Gregor comes between them, and that prompts her to a decisive moment and a heartbreaking moment, because she turns to her parents as they're just sort of like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And she says, "Dear parents," and she addresses them, and she takes charge of the situation, calling Gregor this creature, and then uttering this heartbreaking line, "We have to get rid of it." it. No longer calling him Gregor, no longer referring to him as him or her brother. He is an it, an other, an absolutely alien, inhuman creature in their home. And that's just horrible, quite frankly. It's from there that the story moves along, and when Gregor dies, the story keeps going for some reason. Readers are sometimes confused by this because it just makes sense that, well, when Gregor dies, the story's pretty much over, right? He's been sort of the controlling voice throughout, and well, when he's dead, it makes sense for the story to be over, but it keeps going. And you see the parents and Greta just dealing with that, not really mourning, because as far as they're concerned at this point, Gregor the person left a long time ago. Now it's just about, well, what do we do with the body? And they get the housekeeper to help them clean up, and then they fire the housekeeper because they don't have an income really, or not much of one. So they have to start reasonably making some adjustments to their lifestyle. And they go about doing that in a fairly grown-up and orderly way. Then all three of them left the apartment together, something they had not done for a month, and took the electric tram all the way to the open countryside on the edge of town. The car in which they sat all alone was entirely suffused with warm sunlight. Cozily leaning back in the seats, they discussed their future prospects, and on closer investigation, it appeared that these prospects were not bad at all. For all three of their positions, something they had never before properly discussed, were in fact quite advantageous, and above all offered promising opportunities for advancement. The greatest immediate improvement in their situation, of course, would be easily achieved by moving to a new apartment. They now wish to take a smaller and cheaper but more convenient and above all more practical flat than their current one, which had been picked out for them by Gregor. As they were conversing in this way, Herr and Frau Samsa were struck almost as one while observing their daughter, who was growing ever more vivacious by the thought that despite all the torments that had made her cheeks grow pale, she had recently blossomed into a beautiful, voluptuous girl. Growing quieter now and communicating with one another almost unconsciously by an exchange of glances, they thought about how it would soon be time to find her a good husband. And when they arrived at their destination, it seemed to them almost a confirmation of their dreams and good intentions, when their daughter swiftly sprang to her feet and stretched her young body. It's really quite a lovely little ending, but it raises so many more questions. Now, the practical life advice of saying, well, okay, first thing we got to do is get rid of that big apartment. We're going to live within our means. We all have jobs now at this point. We have an income. We just have to learn to live within that. It's practical, progressive, forward-thinking life. They are thinking about the future for the first time instead of maybe just moping around the apartment, licking their wounds about the past and about, the business went out, and bankrupt. Oh, we're so ashamed. They're done with that. Once Gregor is gone, they're okay. The husk of their old life. Remember the exoskeleton that Gregor was always lumbering around with. The exoskeleton of their old life has fallen away, and now they're okay. And you get this lovely little scene where, okay, well, let's just get out of the apartment for a while. And we have been in this very oppressive, closed-off apartment for so long now that it's a great relief to suddenly be out and about. And they're going to the countryside, which is hopeful, and open spaces more. We're told about this streaming sunlight, and it's so bright, as opposed to the images of the apartment were always so dark and shadowed. So there is a different mood. And the weirdest part again is the parents starting to look at their daughter and saying, well, maybe it's time we find her a nice young man. There is something a little odd and icky about parents looking at their daughter and thinking in terms of her being ever more vivacious or a voluptuous girl. Yeah, that's a little over the line. I think we can all agree. But there is a great sweetness in that. The two parents are just sort of talking about that, and then they're not even talking about that, because the greatest intimacy comes when we learn growing quieter now and communicating with one another almost unconsciously by an exchange of glances. These parents who have had a kind of a weird sexual vibe throughout, where you get the sense that maybe the father was impotent for a little while and the mother was a little bit feeling neglected and hormonal perhaps and just off there, but now they're back and they're communicating with an even greater intimacy of they don't even have to talk. It's a beautiful moment. And then that startling and yet beautiful final image of them watching as the train stops. Greta stands up, swiftly sprang to her feet and stretched her young body. And you can imagine what a young girl stretching her body is going to look like. But there is a sense of hopefulness. There's a sense of life. There's a sense of sexuality. There's a sense of relief and release after all of the oppression. Now, you can look at that as, well, they're just being cruel because Gregor had to die. He became a bug and then he died. And that's, a little callous that they're having this little outing so soon after him just dying. That's not really mourning him in any way. And you can feel bad for Gregor, but at this point, the family has taken over the story. So we too, as readers, are kind of leaving Gregor behind. It is an ugliness we would rather ignore as well, because the new atmosphere is so much more pleasant. The new atmosphere is so much more hopeful. But being with Gregor was a burden. Now, the story itself, you can label an awful lot of different ways, and certainly critics go crazy with this. Gregor as as a stand-in for Kafka, as a young Jew living in Eastern Europe during the early 20th centuries, as possibly as a homosexual, and there's all this stuff about the apartment is just basically a big closet because there's so much emphasis on doors and walls, and it's so oppressive, and they're always stuck inside. You can approach it from that, and it does yield an awful lot of interesting interpretations, a lot of really substantive interpretations as well. But by labeling those particular things, it limits what the text can mean. And so instead of just saying, well, it means this, which is a very either-or thing. It means this, or it means this. It is about being a Jew, or it's about being an artist, or it's about being a homosexual, or it's being just being somebody of his generation, or whatever. By limiting your choices to that, you're kind of walling off the other possibilities. And for me, again, this piece is all about the fun. For me, the greatest joy is finding all of the different possibilities hinted at here and there and saying, well, yeah, it could be that. Let's just add those numbers up that way. And then, it could also be this. And let's add this up this way. And whose story is it after all? Is it Gregor's story? Because he does change, he progresses, but the big change is accomplished in that first sentence already, when he wakes up as a bug, he does gradually lose more vestiges of his humanity, but it's a relatively minor change from there. The family, on the other hand, they all change. They all get different over the course of the story. So maybe they are the real protagonists here. Maybe Greta is the real protagonist, since she is the final image of the story, and she is the one who perhaps changes the most and who gets tracked in that change the most. And all of these interpretations are really more fun than just saying it's a parable about Judaism or homosexuality or repression or oppression of this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, but it's that and more. That and more is more fun, more embracing, more rich and interesting than just saying, nope, it's a parable about this. So that's what I would say. Enjoy this story. Enjoy the interpretation of it. Enjoy scratching your head about it for, the next 50 years or so, because you will. And enjoy the jokes that you suddenly get when you see cartoons of somebody who suddenly looks like a cockroach who's sitting on a psychiatrist's couch or something. These things are funny, and you can embrace the story for that. There is a lot of humor in this story. There's a lot of sadness. There's a lot of oppression. There's a lot of depression and all of that, but it is interwoven within this larger story that employs an awful lot of joy as well.